Buongiorno. Bentornati. Last time we studied first conjugation verbs, the ones that end in are, and we discussed the northern region of Lombardy. Today we will shift our focus to the central western region of Lazio, which contains the capital of the nation, Rome, as we learn second conjugation verbs, the ones that end in ere. Please listen, read, or read along as we look at a few sentences that describe Lazio. Oggi parliamo del Lazio. Il Lazio è una regione nella parte centro-ovest dell'Italia. Si trova al confine con la Toscana e l'Umbria al nord, l'Abruzzo e il Molise all'est e la Campania al sud. Il Mar Tirreno bagna la costa occidentale della regione. Il Lazio contiene la capitale della nazione, Roma. Ci sono 4 province: Frosinone, Latina, Rieti e Viterbo. Segue direttamente la Lombardia in 2 cose. Ha una popolazione grande e un'economia molto forte. C'è tanta storia antica, particolarmente romana, in questa regione. Ci sono tante cose da fare e da vedere per i turisti. La città del Vaticano si trova in questa regione, anche se non fa parte della nazione italiana. Are you able to get more than just the gist this time? Benissimo. Your repeated exposure to the language is surely giving you that advantage. Perhaps here you understood that Lazio is in the central western part of Italy. The text then continues, it borders with Tuscany and Umbria to the north, Abruzzo and Molise to the east, and Campania to the south. The Tyrrhenian Sea washes its western shore. Lazio contains the nation's capital, Rome. There are 4 provinces, Frosinone, Latina, Rieti, and Viterbo. It directly follows Lombardy in 2 things. It has a large population and a very strong economy. There's a lot of ancient history, particularly Roman history, in this region. There are many things for tourists to do and to see. The Vatican City is in this region, even if it is not a part of the Italian nation. Let's look at the purple verbs in this paragraph. Parliamo, trova, bagna, fa. These verbs all belong to the first conjugation, the verbs that end in are, as we can tell from those that end in the third person singular. Trova, bagna, fa all end in a. How about the verbs in blue and green? Of the 2 verbs in blue, contiene and a, perhaps you recognize only the latter one. A is from the irregular verb avere, meaning to have. Contiene ends in an e, which means that it definitely doesn't belong to the first conjugation. Instead, it belongs to the second conjugation, contenere, meaning to contain, as you may have guessed. The verb in green, segue, also ends in e. Does it belong to the second conjugation? Nope. It belongs to the third conjugation, the verbs that end in ire. And here is your first glimpse into the second and third conjugations. They share the same third person singular ending, e, with each other. But we'll get back to that in a moment. Let's talk about Lazio. Truthfully, what is there not to talk about when we talk about this region? It has so much history and importance in contemporary art, politics, and society for Italy. This region always has one foot in the past and one foot in the present. We call it Lazio in Italian, but the original name from Latin is Latium, which some believe comes from the Latin Latus, meaning wide. This is a generally flat region, in fact. Latium was the region of King Latinus, leader of the Latini, the ancient peoples that preceded the Romans, and also of the Etruscans. But when we think of Lazio and Rome, we may think instead of the films of Federico Fellini, such as La Dolce Vita, The Sweet Life. This film depicts the high life of celebrities, artists, and journalists, both in Rome and in their retreats on the beautiful coastal shores, such as the ones at Ostia. We may also think of Nanni Moretti's films like Caro Diario, Dear Diary, and the long ride on his motorino through the various neighborhoods of Rome. And we may think of the film by Paolo Sorrentino, La Grande Bellezza, The Great Beauty, which revisits Fellini's Rome, but from a modern perspective. Rome does not lack for things to see and visit. Set on 7 hills, Rome is home to the Campidoglio, the Colosseum, St. Peter's Basilica and the Vatican, the Castle Sant'Angelo, the Pantheon, and the Trevi Fountain. The Tiber River runs throughout. Since ancient times, Rome has been called the eternal city and the capital of the world. La città eterna è la capitale del mondo. Let's review our first conjugation verbs by thinking about what you can see in Rome. The verb you would use here is visitare, a verb one uses only to talk about visiting tourist attractions, like monuments and museums, or going to the doctor or the dentist. Don't use this verb to talk about visiting friends or family. For that, you would use andare a trovare. I know it sounds clunky, but that's how it is. For example, you would say, vado a trovare la mia amica. But then you would say, visito il Colosseo. Please read with me as we go through all forms of the verb visitare in the present indicative. Visito il Campidoglio. Visiti il Colosseo. Visita la Basilica di San Pietro. Visitiamo il Castel Sant'Angelo. Visitate il Pantheon. Visitano la Fontana Trevi. Bravi! Let's expand our verb base. Remember what Julius Caesar, the Roman emperor, said in Latin? Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, and I conquered. In Italian, you would need 2 second conjugation verbs, vedere and vincere, to do the seeing and the conquering. Venire, to come, is a 3rd conjugation verb. If we want to see and conquer Rome, we'd better learn how to conjugate those verbs that end in ere. Second conjugation verbs follow a very similar pattern to first conjugation verbs. Guess what? There is a pattern between the first, second, and third conjugation verbs for 3 of their forms. The third person singular, the second person plural, and the third person plural. I call this pattern the 1, 2, 3 rule, just like the numbers of the conjugations themselves. Remember that for the first conjugation, there is 1 vowel used 3 times. A appears in the lui, lei, voi, and loro forms. Trova, trovate, trovano. For second conjugation verbs, you can see how the same subject forms have the same endings as in the first conjugation. Vedo, vedi, and vediamo. However, for second conjugation verbs, we use the vowel from the infinitive e in two of those other forms, the lui, lei, and the voi forms. Vede and vedete. And then we use another vowel, o, in the loro form, vedono. Please repeat these conjugations after me. The verb vedere, vedo, vedi, vede, vediamo, vedete, vedono. And the verb trovare, trovo, trovi, trova, troviamo, trovate, trovano. Bravi! If we look ahead briefly at the third conjugation, we can see how this pattern plays out. Please repeat again after me. The verb dormire, to sleep. Dormo, dormi, dorme, dormiamo, dormite, dormono. Here in the third conjugation, we have three different vowels in those select subject forms. Dorme, dormite, and dormono. E, I, and O. Let's quickly practice the second conjugation with the places in Rome we mentioned earlier. Please read these sentences with me. Vedo il Campidoglio. Vedi il Colosseo. Vede la Basilica di San Pietro. Vediamo il Castel Sant'Angelo. Vedete il Pantheon. Vedono la Fontana Trevi. Bravi, bravissimi. Very good. You have probably noticed by now that the third-person plural conjugated forms, the loro forms, have a different accented syllable than the other forms. The accent falls on the third-to-last syllable, not the second-to-last syllable. Trovano, vedono, dormono. Second conjugation verbs in the present indicative have few irregularities. Frequently used verbs include chiedere, to ask, chiudere, to close, correre, to run, decidere, to decide, dipingere, to paint, discutere, to discuss, leggere, to read, mettere, to place, perdere, to lose, prendere, to take, ricevere, to receive, rispondere, to respond, scrivere, to write, spendere, to spend, vendere, to sell, vincere, to win, and vivere, to live. Those verbs all follow this conjugation pattern. But of course, nothing in a language is without irregularity. So verbs that end in cere, gere, and scere all keep a hard sound in the first-person singular and third-person plural forms. For example, the verb vincere becomes io vinco and loro vincono. Conoscere, which means to be familiar with, to know, is io conosco and loro conoscono. Dipingere becomes io dipingo and loro dipingono. There's something else you probably noticed about second conjugation infinitives. Did they sound different to you as we read them aloud? That's because the stress on these infinitives falls on the third to last syllable, not the second to last syllable. Repeat after me, please. Chiedere, chiudere, correre, decidere, dipingere, discutere, leggere, mettere, perdere, prendere, ricevere, rispondere, scrivere, vendere, vincere, and vivere. Bravi! Exceptions to this rule include cadere, to fall, and some irregular verbs, such as avere, to have, sapere, to know, dovere, to have to or to owe, potere, to be able to, and volere, to want to or to wish to. Let's talk about those irregular verbs. Do you remember how many irregular verbs belong to the first conjugation? We can count them on one hand. Andare, dare, fare, and stare. Sure, we also have to remember that regular verbs, like mangiare and cominciare, do not include an extra I in the tu and noi forms. Tu mangi, noi mangiamo. We also have to remember that verbs like pagare, to pay, and cercare, to look for, need an extra H in the tu and noi forms. Tu paghi, noi paghiamo. The second conjugation has more irregular verbs, but guess what? You know one of them already. That's right, the verb avere, to have. We will come back to the special uses of this verb toward the end of this lesson. The following are irregular second conjugation verbs. Please repeat them after me. Bere, to drink. Conoscere, to be familiar with. Sapere, to know. Dovere, to have to. Potere, to be able to. Volere, to want to or to wish to, or to want. We will go over most of these irregular verbs, which are called modal verbs, in lesson number 9. Bere reverts to its Latinate stem in its conjugated forms, bev, just like fare uses its Latinate stem, fac. This is just a small indication of how much Italian is linked to Latin. Let's look at the conjugated forms of bere. Please repeat them after me. Bevo, bevi, beve, beviamo, bevete, bevono. Bene. What are some typical Italian beverages? Let's practice this verb with them. Please read these sentences with me. Bevo l'espresso ogni mattina. Bevi il chinotto? Il bambino beve l'aranciata. Beviamo del vino rosso a cena. Bevete un bicchiere di limoncello? Bevono della grappa. Bravi. There are a few other irregular verbs that belong to the second conjugation. Rimanere, to remain, to stay. Scegliere, to choose. Spegnere, to turn off. And tenere, to hold or to keep. These verbs follow their own particular patterns. Let's look at these forms. Please repeat after me. The verb rimanere. Rimango, rimani. rimane, rimaniamo, rimanete, rimangono. Now the verb tenere. Tengo, tieni, tiene, teniamo, tenete, tengono. The verb spegnere. Spengo, spegni, spegne. Spegniamo, spegnete, spengono. And finally the verb scegliere. Scelgo, scegli, sceglie, scegliamo, scegliete, scelgono. Bravi, good job. All of these irregular verbs have unique io and loro forms with a go or gono ending. Rimango and rimangono. Tengo and tengono. But scegliere and spegnere can be confusing, as the stem really changes much more than that. Scelgo and scelgono, but scegli, sceglie, and so on. Spegnere also switches two consonants. Spengo and spengono, but spegni and spegne. These are very different sounds, so be careful. It's like the difference between saying famiglia and gnocchi, for example. Let's use some of these verbs in context to describe the adventures of Marcello Mastroianni's character, Marcello Rubini, in La Dolce Vita by Federico Fellini. Please read with me. Marcello è un giornalista che vive a Roma. Scrive articoli per una rivista di pettegolezzi. Nella prima scena del film, Marcello fa un giro in elicottero. C'è un altro elicottero che porta una statua di Gesù Cristo. Volano sopra un acquedotto romano e vanno in città. Vediamo Marcello che segue la statua fino alla Basilica di San Pietro. In un'altra scena del film vediamo Marcello con un'attrice svedese americana, Silvia, che è la famosa Anita Ekberg. Marcello chiede a Silvia di fare una gita alla Basilica di San Pietro. Lei risponde di sì. Loro discutono poco. Loro entrano nella Fontana dei Trevi. I'm sure you recognized a lot of first conjugation verbs in this paragraph. Verbs like portare, volare, and andare. But you also recognize the verbs in green as belonging to the second conjugation. Vive, scrive, chiede, risponde, and discutono are all clearly second conjugation verbs because of their endings. E in the third person singular and ono in the third person plural. What about vediamo? It's hard to distinguish the conjugation of present indicative verbs in the noi form, since they are the same across all three conjugations. This is where the regular study of vocabulary will help you. Who is Marcello, and what does Marcello do in this movie? Let's translate. Marcello is a journalist who lives in Rome, writing articles for a gossip magazine. In the first scene of the film, Marcello takes a helicopter ride. There is another helicopter that carries a statue of Jesus. They, both helicopters, fly over a Roman aqueduct and then go into the city. We see Marcello, who follows the statue until the Basilica of San Pietro. In another scene of the film, we see Marcello with a Swedish-American actress, Sylvia, who is played by the famous Anita Ekberg. Marcello asks Sylvia to go on a trip to the Basilica of San Pietro. She answers yes. They speak little. Then they go to the Trevi fountain. Let's consider Marcello and Sylvia at the Trevi fountain as we practice further with the verb avere and learn some idiomatic expressions with avere. To be clear, idiomatic expressions are expressions that we do not translate literally, as we will see. First, let's repeat the conjugated forms of avere. Ho, hai, ha, abbiamo, avete, hanno. Please now read with me as we describe them. Marcello è alto e bruno. Ha I capelli corti. Porta una giacca nera e dei pantaloni neri. Lui tiene il polso di Silvia con la mano destra. Silvia è alta. Ha dei bei capelli lunghi e biondi. Porta un abito da sera nero. Bene. We know that avere is used to describe hair and eye color, as we did here, and as we did earlier with Inspector Montalbano. Avere is also used to discuss age. For example, in this film, the character Marcello is around 40 years old. Marcello ha circa around 40 anni, 40 years. Avere is also used in numerous idiomatic expressions. For example, to say that you are feeling hot or cold, hungry or thirsty or sleepy, you need to use the verb avere. It is idiomatic because you are saying that someone has these conditions: heat, cold, hunger, thirst, or sleepiness. Idiomatic expressions do not translate literally into another language, and definitely not English in these cases. Here they are. Please repeat after me. Avere caldo, to be warm or hot. Avere fame, to be hungry. Avere freddo, to be cold. Avere ragione, to be correct, to be right. Avere sete, to be thirsty. Avere sonno, to be sleepy. Avere bisogno di, to need or to be in need of. Avere voglia di, to feel like, to crave, to want. Let's play with these expressions, asking questions about Silvia and Marcello, who are in the Trevi fountain in the early hours of the morning. You'll notice that questions in Italian are constructed in two ways, either by raising your tone at the end of the question or by inverting the subject with the last word of the sentence. Please read with me. Hanno freddo Silvia e Marcello? Hanno sonno? Hanno voglia di un caffè? Hanno fame? Hanno sete? Hanno bisogno di dormire? Hanno bisogno di mangiare? Bravi. Could you imagine what their responses would be? I think they would say the following in the first person plural form. Read with me. Sì, abbiamo freddo. Sì, abbiamo sonno. Sì, abbiamo voglia di un caffè. Sì, abbiamo fame e sete. Sì, abbiamo bisogno di dormire. Sì, abbiamo bisogno di mangiare. And now we will conclude with my asking you those questions. Feel free to respond. Hai caldo? Hai fame? Hai freddo? Hai sete? Hai sonno? Hai voglia di dormire? Hai bisogno di un caffè? And what would I say? No, non ho caldo, non ho fame, non ho freddo e non ho sete, non ho sonno, non ho voglia di dormire. No, non ho bisogno di un caffè, ma ho sempre voglia di un caffè. I would always like coffee. Bravi! I hope that you have enjoyed our first taste of Lazio. We will return to this fascinating region. La prossima fermata, our next stop, la Valle d'Aosta and Trentino Alto Adige. Ci vediamo presto. Alla prossima!